Let me ask you something real. What if the relationship you grieve wasn't just a heartbreak, but a harvest? What if you didn't just lose love, you almost lost yourself? Welcome back to Empowered Shadows. And this one is for the soul who didn't just walk away from a toxic relationship. You escaped a contract your spirit never signed. This wasn't just betrayal, it was bondage. It was confusion disguised as closeness. It was energetic theft dressed as intimacy. They didn't love you. They fed off you. They kept you in a cycle of fear, self-doubt, and spiritual confusion. Not because they didn't know who you were, but because they did. And the moment you started asking questions, they called you crazy, unstable, dramatic. You weren't unstable. You were being spiritually sedated. And now that you've cut the cord, your frequency is returning. You're remembering not just what happened, but who you were before it did. Let's talk about the dark unions that almost devoured you and the power of reclaiming what was never theirs to keep. You didn't lose a relationship. You escaped a contract. Let's tell the truth. It wasn't love. It was spiritual trafficking. You were bought into a connection that looked like intimacy, but felt like captivity. This wasn't about soulmates. This was about submission, not the sacred kind, the psychological, emotional, energetic kind. They mirrored your magic long enough to get in, and once you opened the door, they began the work of siphoning you, your peace, your joy, your gifts, your softness, your light. It wasn't a slow fade. It was a spiritual hijacking. You weren't just crying because you missed them. You were grieving the version of you who remembered how to hear God without their interference. This wasn't a breakup. It was a jailbreak. Spiritual harvesting, what they took while you were just trying to survive. They didn't need you happy. They needed you hooked. They fed off your over-explaining, your apologizing, your breakdowns. Not overtly, not always consciously, but energetically, they were always feeding. Every argument left you drained. Every conversation was an extraction. You were trying to repair what they never wanted to protect. And the worst part, they convinced you that you were the taker, that your intuition was paranoia, that your instincts were projections, that your exhaustion was attitude. But your spirit was starving. Your nervous system was screaming. And your gifts, they were quiet because your soul can't channel clearly when it's being hijacked. Fear was the spell, OCD was the cage. You started double-checking everything, rehearsing conversations in your head, obsessing over what to say, when to say it, how it might land. You called it overthinking, but it was a spell, a fear-based trance. You weren't being cautious, you were being controlled. OCD patterns, looping thoughts, overcompensating, hyper-awareness of tone, timing, body, language. That wasn't your personality. That was proximity to manipulation. And when you tried to slow down, your body said no, because it was trained to expect punishment and stillness. You weren't broken, you were programmed. But the moment you stepped back, the trance cracked, and underneath it was you. You missed the signs because they were lowering your frequency. Looking back, the red flags were there, but you didn't ignore them. You couldn't see them clearly because your energy was under siege. They kept your vibration low on purpose. Just enough confusion, just enough guilt, just enough love to keep the leash disguised as a lifeline. When your frequency is low, intuition gets foggy, discernment gets distorted, spirit whispers, but fear shouts over it. And that's the point. They didn't want you regulated. They wanted you reactive, because a chaotic soul is easier to control. You weren't blind, you were being blinded. And the moment your nervous system calmed down enough to hear what was underneath the noise, you saw it all. Tuning back in, how you found yourself without anything artificial. When you finally left, the silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like absence. You couldn't feel them anymore, but you couldn't feel you either. The world gets loud when you're detoxing from spiritual confusion. That's why so many go looking for something to fill the gap. THC, psychedelics, overstimulation, over-explaining, over-giving. But what you needed wasn't escape. It was alignment. And you found it in the elements, in the water, in breath, in the pages of your journal, in meditation, in music, in quiet moments by yourself where no one was watching. And slowly, your voice came back, your knowing came back, your center came back. You didn't need to become powerful. You remembered that you were. You were born magical. That just made you forget. Before the damage, before the drama, before the confusion, you had gifts, real ones. You saw things, felt things, knew things you couldn't explain. But when your light became inconvenient to them, they shamed it, mocked it, made it feel weird, too much, or witchy. And after a while, you believed them. You buried your magic to feel safe. You dulled your frequency to be palatable. You replaced your rituals with self-doubt and called it growing up. But forgetting your power is not the same as losing it. You hid it in your spirit. The moment you chose yourself again, it returned. Your ancestors never stopped guarding it. Your spirit never stopped holding it. You didn't need their permission to reclaim it. You only needed space. This wasn't just a narcissist. It was a spiritual hijacking. Let's be clear. You weren't dealing with just a narcissist. You were dealing with a principality. A spirit that came to block your calling, to distort your frequency, to use your light for their gain, and leave you depleted while they rose on borrowed energy. This wasn't a bad relationship. It was a dark assignment. One that they tried to pull you into soul confusion, into powerlessness, into trauma loops so deep you forget you had power to say no. They studied your light, mirrored your divinity, and wrapped manipulation in the language of love. But it was never love. It was spiritual theft. They used sex to create cords, shame to cloud your intuition, guilt to keep you compliant, and when that didn't work, they reached for spiritual homicide, energetically starving you, emotionally isolating you, physically draining you while pretending they were doing their best. This was never about connection. It was about control. But your soul sounded the alarm. Your spiritual team intervened, and you walked out of something that was meant to keep you buried permanently. You didn't just leave. You were spiritually retrieved. You weren't just brave. You were rescued. Because the version of you that stayed, she wasn't okay. She was shrinking. She was vanishing. She was disappearing by the day and still being told you're the problem. But your higher self, she didn't forget. She sent out a frequency your oppressors couldn't hear. A signal your ancestors did, and they moved. The dreams, the signs, the illness, the clarity, the loss, the betrayal. It was all divine interruption. Because God wasn't going to let you die in what He never called you to. You didn't just leave. You were spiritually retrieved. And that's why they're still watching, still confused, still obsessed, because they know they lost access to something holy. The revenge you craved and the justice already in motion. You wanted them to feel it, the pain, the confusion, the loss, the consequences. You wanted justice, not because you're vengeful, because for too long you were unheard, unseen, and unprotected. And that sacred rage is valid, it's holy. But what do you do with it? That's what makes it transformational. You don't need to fight dirty. You need to rise differently, because vengeance would have cost your peace. It could have delayed your healing. It would have made you carry what you were never meant to hold. So instead, you gave it to God, to Spirit, to the laws of karma and divine alignment, and trust. They're already feeling it. You didn't curse them. It's because they touched you, touched the anointed, and tried to profit from pain that wasn't theirs to narrate. Let them lie. Let them watch. Let them spiral. You're not bitter. You're boundaried. And that's revenge enough. The power was never theirs. You just forgot. They didn't steal your power. They borrowed it through fear. They accessed your softness by convincing you it wasn't sacred. They dimmed your light by dressing manipulation in the language of love. They weakened your instincts by calling your truth too sensitive. But here's what they didn't count on. You regenerate. You rebuild. You remember. You were never meant to be erased. You were meant to be reawakened. And now, every ritual you return to, every whisper of intuition you trust again, every tear you let fall without shame is an act of spiritual justice. They thought they could profit from your spiritual death. They thought you stayed small, scared, confused. They were wrong. You are not broken. You are reseated in your power. Your voice no longer cracked. It's crowned. You didn't just survive them. You outlived the version of you that needed their approval to feel divine. And that's what they feared most. You weren't just the light. You were the fire they couldn't contain. Now you know. And now you reclaim every single part of you they tried to bury under their story. Wherever you are, get still. Breathe deep. This is not a visualization. This is a return. Say it aloud. Whisper it, scream it, or let your spirit shake the words through you. I call back the power that was stolen through seduction and deceit. I call back the essence that was harvested while I slept. I call back my voice from the lies they told in my name. I call back my vision from every altar where they placed my likeness in secret. I revoke every contract I never consciously agreed to. I dismantle every soul tie formed in manipulation. I uproot every false seed planted to make me forget I was divine. I unbind my body from their gaze. I unbind my spirit from their words. I unbind my energy from every jealous mouth, every envious eye, every watching demon. You may have studied me, but you will not feed from me again. I release the fear that kept me unavailable. I release the guilt that made me complacent. I release the shame that silenced me when I should have roared. I am no longer in hiding. I am no longer in orbit around their dysfunction. I am no longer confused about who carries the anointing. It's me. And I declare this with my whole chest, my womb, my heart, my soul. I am the storm they tried to contain. I am the prayer they feared would be answered. I am the God-breath force they couldn't erase. And I return to myself now, fully finally and forever. Exhale like you're exhaling someone else's name. Inhale like you're remembering your own. They tried to steal your soul, not because you were weak, because your light made them feel exposed. They didn't just lie about you. They built entire identities off your pain. They sold the version of you they created while trying to bury the truth beneath your silence. And now you've spoken, you've cut the cord, you've burned the contract, you recalled the fire. They were never the authors. They were never the gods. They were never the prize. You are. You didn't just walk away. You rose. You didn't just survive. You resurrected. And everything they thought they gained in your absence were turned to ash in their mouth. Because nothing built on stolen spirit gets to stand forever. This is your life now. Not a haunted version. Not a diminished version. Not a post-trauma survival script. This is the reborn you. The you with memory. The you with thunder in her bones. The you who remembers her magic and doesn't explain it to anyone. This is Empowered Shadows. Thank you for listening.